3 days before Christmas, the snow fell wet and heavy over Cedar Ridge, Oregon territory, turning the road to slush and the air sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Wreaths of green boughs hung on shop doors, and voices carried talk of family dinners and warm fires. At the edge of town, Dorothea Finch hauled her daughter down from the wagon and let go of her arm as if she were dropping something already dead. "You are no longer my child," she said, her voice flat and final. "Don't follow me. Don't speak my name again." Daisy Finch stood where she was left, her heavy body shaking in the cold, her breath coming in short white clouds. 19 years old, too large to disappear, too unwanted to be claimed. She watched the wagon roll away toward the sound of bells and laughter. Christmas was coming, and Daisy understood, with a hollow certainty, that it was not meant for her. Before we continue, if you feel connected to these characters and their struggle, know that you are not just watching, you are walking beside them. Like, share, and subscribe to keep traveling these forgotten roads with us, one story at a time. Daisy Finch had learned, from a very young age, that her presence took up too much space, not just in rooms, but in lives. She had grown into a large body, early soft, heavy, impossible to overlook, and her mother never let her forget it. Dorothea Finch spoke of Daisy's size as if it were a moral failure, proof of weakness and excess. Food was counted, portions were watched. Every bite Daisy took was followed by a look that said, "You owe me for this." When Daisy was small, there had been another life, a father who lifted her easily, an infant brother whose cries filled the house, and winters when Christmas meant warmth instead of fear. That life ended abruptly. Her father died, leaving behind debts, grief, and a woman who did not know how to carry loss without needing someone to blame. Dorothea chose Daisy. From then on, every misfortune found its way back to her daughter. When money ran short, Dorothea said it was because Daisy ate too much. When neighbors whispered, Dorothea said it was because Daisy embarrassed her. When exhaustion and bitterness hollowed Dorothea's marriage, she told herself it was because God had cursed her with an unlovable child. The worst blame came when Daisy's younger brother fell ill and died. Dorothea could not accept a world where children simply slipped away. She needed a reason that felt controllable, punishable. She decided Daisy was that reason. She said the money spent feeding Daisy should have gone to medicine. She said Daisy's body had drained the household dry. She said it to Daisy's face, again and again, until Daisy stopped crying and started believing it. By the time Dorothea remarried, Daisy had already learned silence. Her stepfather, Ed, noticed that silence. He noticed how Daisy avoided eye contact, how she flinched at sudden movement, how she had learned to make herself small despite a body that refused to cooperate. He crossed boundaries quietly. In moments when Dorothea was gone or distracted, relying on Daisy's fear and confusion to keep her still. When Daisy finally broke and told her mother, she did not beg for comfort. She begged for protection. Dorothea did not give it. Instead, she looked at Daisy's body and decided the answer that hurt least was the one that condemned her daughter. She accused Daisy of tempting a grown man. She called her shameful, filthy, dangerous. She said no decent husband could resist a girl like that if she wanted attention badly enough. The betrayal sealed something inside Daisy. Whatever hope she had left collapsed inward. Dorothea drove her out soon after, spitting words meant to cut deeper than any blow. She said Daisy had ruined her life. She said Daisy was no daughter of hers. She said she wished she had never brought her into the world. So when Dorothea shoved Daisy from the wagon at the edge of Cedar Ridge 3 days before Christmas, it did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. Daisy sat in the cold because she did not know where else to go. She had been trained her whole life to believe she was the problem, the burden, the thing that should disappear. The town lights ahead of her promised warmth and judgment in equal measure. The road behind her led only to a woman who had already appeased her. By the time the sound of wagon wheels faded, Daisy no longer wondered why her mother had abandoned her. She only wondered how long she was allowed to keep breathing in a world that had never made room for her at all. Daisy did not remember how long she sat there. The cold crept in slowly at first, numbing her feet through the thin soles of her boots, then climbing her legs until her knees ached and her hands trembled too badly to stay still. Snow melted against her skirt and soaked through the fabric, leaving her skin raw and burning beneath the chill. She pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little more than remind her how fragile her defenses were. People passed the edge of town without stopping. A man carrying parcels glanced at her once and looked away. A woman hurried past, pulling her coat closer, eyes fixed straight ahead. Daisy understood that look. It was the same one her mother wore whenever Daisy's existence threatened to become inconvenient. She tried to stand when the shaking grew worse, but dizziness forced her back down. Her breath came shallow now, each exhale a thin white cloud that vanished too quickly. Somewhere inside her mind, a quiet voice began to whisper that this was how people disappeared, not all at once, but slowly, while the world went on preparing for Christmas dinners and warm beds. That was when the sound of wagon wheels reached her. Heavy wheels, slow, laden with weight. Daisy lifted her head just enough to see a team of horses pulling a timber wagon toward the edge of Cedar Ridge. The air carried the sharp scent of freshly cut wood, resin and damp bark. The man driving the wagon sat straight-backed despite the cold, broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy coat, his movements economical and practiced. He was not looking for trouble. He was already leaving. The wagon passed her before it stopped. The horses snorted, stamping as the man reined them in and climbed down. He did not approach immediately. He stood a few steps away, giving her space, as if he understood that distance could be the difference between fear and flight. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, not unkind. Daisy flinched anyway. I'm sorry," she said at once. "I'll move. I didn't mean to." She tried to push herself up again, failed, and felt humiliation flood her face hotter than the cold ever could. The man frowned slightly, not at her body, but at the way she struggled. "I didn't say you had to go." She froze, confused by the words. He asked her name. When she answered, her voice sounded small even to her own ears. He told her his Nathan Grant and explained, without embellishment, that he lived up in the hills beyond Cedar Ridge. He cut timber. He sold it when he needed supplies. That was all. There was no softness in his offer, no promise of safety or kindness. "There's room where I live," he said. "Not much. It's warm enough to get through winter. If you stay, you work, cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. I don't keep idlers." Daisy listened, her mind strangely blank. Every warning she had ever learned pressed against her ribs. A strange man, an isolated place, no witnesses. Her body tensed, ready to refuse, ready to apologize for existing, ready to accept whatever punishment followed. But the cold was no longer waiting. It was inside her now, dragging at her limbs, fogging her thoughts, stealing the strength she needed to be afraid properly. She looked toward the lights of Cedar Ridge, toward doors that had already closed in her face, toward a mother who had erased her without hesitation. Then she looked at the road ahead, white and empty, and understood the truth with brutal clarity. There was no other choice. Daisy did not agree because she trusted Nathan Grant. She agreed because staying where she was meant freezing before morning. "I can work," she said, forcing the words out past teeth that would not stop chattering. "I won't be trouble." Nathan studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something unseen. Then he nodded once and held out a hand not to pull her close, but to help her stand. Daisy took it, already braced for regret. As she climbed onto the timber wagon, she told herself what she had learned to believe all her life, that this shelter was temporary, that kindness never lasted, and that when the time came to be cast out again, she would endure it quietly. Behind her, Cedar Ridge disappeared into falling snow. Ahead lay the hills, the dark trees, and a winter she would survive only because she had nothing left to lose. Nathan's place sat higher than Daisy expected, tucked into a fold of the hills where the trees grew thick and the wind cut sideways through the pines. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had settled in, turning the snow a dull blue. The building itself was plain but solid, built from thick logs darkened by years of smoke and weather. No decorations marked the season, no wreath, no candle in the window. Only a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney proved the place was lived in at all. Inside, warmth struck Daisy, almost painfully. Her fingers burned as feeling crept back into them, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Nathan set more wood on the fire and handed her a blanket without ceremony, then turned away as if giving her privacy were the most natural thing in the world. He showed her where to put her things, where the water was drawn, where she could sleep. His words were few, precise, leaving no room for confusion or debt. The first days passed in a careful rhythm. Daisy worked from the moment she woke until night fell, scrubbing, cooking, hauling water, mending what she could. She waited constantly for the moment Nathan would decide she was too slow, too clumsy, too much. Each creak of the floorboards made her tense. Each silence felt like judgment forming. It never came. Nathan spoke little, but he noticed everything. When Daisy's hands cracked and bled from the cold, new salve appeared on the table without comment. When her shoulders shook with exhaustion, he quietly took over the heavier work. He never touched her without warning, never stood too close, never asked questions she was not ready to answer. Christmas Eve arrived without announcement. The day felt heavier to Daisy than the others, as if the air itself remembered what she had lost. While Nathan was outside splitting wood, she stood alone in the cabin and made a decision that surprised even her. Using the supplies she had rationed carefully all week, she began to cook. She worked slowly, deliberately, coaxing warmth and scent from the simplest ingredients. A pot of stew simmered on the fire, bread baked in a small pan, potatoes roasted in the embers. It was more food than they needed, more effort than survival required, but Daisy could not stop herself. Something inside her needed this. By the time Nathan came in, snow clinging to his coat, the cabin smelled rich and full. He paused just inside the door, his expression unreadable. "What's all this?" he asked. "It's Christmas," Daisy said quietly, eyes fixed on her hands. "I thought maybe we could eat together." They sat across from each other at the small table, the fire crackling between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daisy tasted the food and memory hit her like a blow. She saw her father again, laughing softly as he carved meat. Her little brother banging his spoon against the table, a Christmas long ago, before illness, before blame, before silence became her shield. The ache rose fast, sharp and merciless. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep eating, afraid that if she stopped, everything inside her would spill out. Nathan noticed anyway. "This is the first Christmas dinner I've had in 15 years, he said at last. Daisy looked up, startled. He stared into the fire as he spoke, voice rough but steady. He told her about his wife, about their daughter, about a winter sickness that took them both while he was away. He did not dramatize it. He did not ask for sympathy. He simply stated the facts, as if naming them out loud were a burden he had carried alone for too long. "I don't celebrate," he finished. Didn't see the point. The silence that followed was not empty. It was shared. Daisy realized then that she was not the only one at that table eating against old wounds, that the warmth around them was not just from the fire, but from the simple, dangerous act of being seen. When the meal was finished, Nathan poured them each a cup of coffee and raised his slightly, awkwardly. "Merry Christmas," he said. Daisy felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time in years, the words did not feel like a lie. "Merry Christmas," she answered. Outside, snow continued to fall, thick and quiet, covering the hills in white. Inside the cabin, two broken lives sat in fragile peace. unaware that the night they were surviving together would become the moment everything else began to change. The first time Daisy returned to Cedar Ridge after the winter, she felt the town before she saw it. The sound of voices carried farther in the cold air. The smell of wet wood and horses mixed with thawing earth. People stopped what they were doing when Nathan's timber wagon rolled down the main road, their eyes following him with the same uneasy curiosity she remembered from before, only now. Those looks slid toward her as well. She stood straighter than she used to, but the old fear stirred anyway. Nathan had come for supplies, flour, coffee, nails. Simple things. He moved through town with the same quiet authority he always had, paying fair prices, speaking little, keeping his distance. Daisy stayed close, hands folded, reminding herself that she was no longer the girl left shaking outside the gates. Then she heard her mother's voice. "Well, look at that." Dorothea Finch stepped out from between two buildings, thinner than Daisy remembered, sharper somehow, as if bitterness had carved her down to bone. Her eyes swept over Daisy, slowly, too slowly, taking in the cleaner dress, the steadier posture, the absence of hunger. "So you didn't freeze after all," Dorothea said. "I suppose miracles do happen." Daisy's chest tightened. Her instinct was to lower her gaze, to apologize for surviving. Nathan didn't move. He turned to face Dorothea calmly. "Ma'am," he said, already sensing the shape of trouble. Dorothea ignored him at first. "I wondered where you'd ended up," she continued, her tone syrupy and cruel. "I should have known you'd latch onto the first man foolish enough to feel sorry for you." Something in Daisy cracked, not fully. Not yet, but enough to sting. Nathan's voice remained level. "She's with me by choice." Dorothea laughed. Sharp and ugly. Choice, her eyes flicked to him then. Assessing, calculating. "You think a girl like her chooses anything? You think she didn't cling to you because she had nowhere else to go?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to draw attention. "My daughter has always been desperate for affection, always willing to use what she has to keep it." Daisy's hands trembled. Dorothea turned fully toward Nathan now. "I don't know what story she told you," she said, "but she's always been trouble. Gluttonous, lazy, a drain. She ruined my first marriage. She ruined my household. And when my boy died," she paused, letting the words hang. She didn't even have the decency to feel ashamed. The air felt suddenly thin. Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's enough." Dorothea smiled, triumphant. "You see," she said to the small gathering that had begun to form. "He doesn't know her, doesn't know how she lies, how she manipulates, how she was never manipulated." Dorothea went on, her voice rising. She knew exactly what she was doing with Ed. Flaunting herself, drawing him in. "I warned her what would happen if she didn't learn her place." Daisy heard a ringing in her ears. The words hit harder than the cold ever had. Sharper than hunger. Old reflexes screamed at her to disappear, to accept the blame, to keep the peace by breaking herself. Nathan took a step forward. "You don't get to talk about her like that." Dorothea's eyes gleamed. "Oh, but I do. She's my daughter." "No," Daisy said. The word came out rough, unfamiliar. Both of them turned to her. Daisy's heart pounded so hard she thought it might tear free of her chest. Her face burned. Every lesson she had ever learned told her this was dangerous, that speaking would only make things worse. But something else had grown inside her over the winter, something steadier, warmer. "I said no," she repeated, louder this time. "You don't get to speak for me anymore." Dorothea stared at her in disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous." Daisy stepped forward, hands shaking but her feet steady. "You blamed me for everything that ever went wrong in your life," she said. "You blamed me when Father died. You blamed me when my brother got sick. You said I ate too much, breathed too much, existed too loudly." Dorothea scoffed. "Someone had to tell you the truth." "The truth," Daisy's voice rose, surprising even herself. The truth is, you needed someone smaller than your grief, someone you could punish instead of mourning. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daisy swallowed and went on. And when Ed touched me when I was terrified and came to you, you didn't protect me. You didn't even listen. You called me filthy. You said I tempted him. You threw me out and told me I was no longer your child. Dorothea's face hardened. You were asking for it. The words landed like a slap. Something in Daisy finally snapped clean in two. No, she said, her voice ringing clear across the street. I was a child, and you failed me. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Dorothea recovered quickly, her eyes darting back to Nathan. You hear this, she said, gesturing wildly. Lies. All of it. She's twisting things to make herself look innocent, and now she's living off you like a parasite. Nathan spoke before Daisy could. She works harder than anyone I know. Dorothea sneered. Of course she does, because she knows she has to earn her keep. And since you're so invested, perhaps it's time we discussed compensation. Nathan stiffened. Compensation for what? For taking my daughter, Dorothea said smoothly. You took her without permission, without arrangement. That's kidnapping as far as I'm concerned, but I'm a reasonable woman. Her gaze sharpened. Pay me, and I'll forget this unpleasantness. The crowd stirred, uncertainty giving way to discomfort. Daisy felt the last of her fear burn away, replaced by something fierce and clean. You don't own me, she said. You gave up that right the moment you left me to die in the snow. Dorothea opened her mouth to retort. Enough. The voice cut through the tension like a blade. Reverend Elijah Turner stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his expression grave, his eyes steady. I was there, he said. I saw you abandon your daughter outside this town. I heard you say she was no longer yours. Dorothea's face drained of color. You do not get to return now and sell her suffering for profit. The Reverend continued, and you do not get to rewrite what you chose to do. He turned to Daisy, his voice gentler. You owe this woman nothing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dorothea stepped back, her composure cracking at last, as the weight of judgment shifted away from Daisy and settled squarely on her. Daisy stood, trembling but upright. For the first time in her life, she had not swallowed the cruelty. She had spoken, and the world had listened. They left Cedar Ridge without another word. Nathan did not hurry the horses, but he did not linger either. The road out of town stretched ahead, wet and rutted, the last of the gathered crowd dissolving behind them, as if it had never been there at all. Daisy sat beside him on the wagon, her hands clenched in her lap, her whole body buzzing with the aftermath of what she had done. She had spoken. The realization felt unreal, like waking from a fever dream. Her mother's words still echoed in her ears, sharp and poisonous, but for the first time they did not lodge themselves inside her chest. They hovered, then drifted away, leaving behind an unfamiliar quiet. Nathan waited until the town was well behind them before he spoke. You didn't do anything wrong. Daisy swallowed. I know, she said, surprised to find that she meant it. Then, more softly, I didn't know I could say it out loud like that. I thought if I ever did, everything would fall apart. He nodded once. Sometimes it does, he said. Sometimes that's how you know it was built on lies. The rest of the ride passed in companionable silence. Snow clung to the trees again as the hills closed in around them, the familiar shelter of the forest rising up like a wall against the world. By the time the cabin came into view, Daisy's shaking had eased, replaced by a deep, bone-tired exhaustion. Inside, Nathan built up the fire and set water to boil. The ordinary motions grounded her. When he handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushed, and Daisy noticed she did not flinch. I was afraid, she admitted suddenly, not of her, of myself, of staying quiet again. Nathan met her eyes. You didn't. That night, Daisy slept without dreaming. In the days that followed, something in her shifted. The old habits did not vanish overnight. She still caught herself apologizing when she dropped a spoon, still felt her shoulders tense at sudden sounds. But the weight was different now, lighter, as if a door she had never known was locked had finally been opened. Nathan watched the change without comment. He did not praise her for her courage or ask her to relive it. He simply treated her the same as he always had. And in that steadiness, Daisy found room to breathe. One evening, as they sat near the fire mending gear, Daisy spoke again. She said, "I don't belong anywhere." She said quietly. I believed her for a long time. Nathan set his work aside. "You belong where you're treated with decency," he said. "Where your work matters. Where your presence isn't a burden." Daisy looked around the cabin, the worn table, the stacked firewood, the quiet order of a life built by choice. "Here," she asked. "If you want it," he replied. The words were not a demand. They were an offering. Something warm spread through her chest, slow and steady. Not the desperate clinging she had known before, but a careful hope, tested and real. "I do," she said. Spring came gradually, the snow retreating inch by inch, the air softening with damp earth and new growth. With it came change neither of them named at first. Nathan stayed closer to the cabin now, no longer disappearing into the hills for days at a time. Daisy moved through the space with growing confidence, no longer waiting for the moment she would be sent away. One afternoon, standing together on the porch, watching the last snow melt into the ground, Nathan spoke the truth they had both been circling. "I care about you," he said. "Not because I saved you, not because you needed a place to stay." Daisy's heart thudded, steady and sure. "I know," she said. "I care about you too." They did not rush it. There was no dramatic promise, no sweeping declaration, just the quiet understanding that what had grown between them was chosen freely, not out of fear or debt. And for Daisy Finch, that choice meant everything. Spring settled fully into the hills above Cedar Ridge, turning the ground soft and dark and filling the air with the scent of wet earth and new leaves. The world felt wider than it had in winter, less threatening. Though Daisy knew now that safety did not come from seasons alone. It came from choice. A few weeks after the confrontation in town, Nathan suggested they return to Cedar Ridge not for supplies, but for something unfinished. Daisy felt a flicker of unease at the thought, yet it did not root itself in her chest the way it once would have. They found Reverend Elijah Turner in the small wooden church near the edge of town, sunlight slanting through the narrow windows and catching dust in the air. The Reverend looked up from his desk when they entered, surprise softening into a gentle smile. "I wondered if I might see you again," he said. Daisy stepped forward first. Her hands trembled, but her voice held. "We wanted to thank you," she said, "for speaking when I couldn't, for telling the truth when it mattered." Nathan placed a small bundle on the desk: coffee, flour, a piece of smoked meat. Nothing extravagant. Only what they could spare. "It isn't much," he said. "But we meant it." The Reverend accepted the gifts with quiet grace. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "Doing right isn't a debt to be repaid." Daisy hesitated, then drew a breath that felt like stepping across a threshold. "There's something else." She glanced at Nathan, who gave a small nod. "We'd like to be married," Daisy said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had survived, quietly, without spectacle. "We were hoping you might if you're willing." Reverend Turner's smile deepened, not with surprise, but with recognition. "I would be honored." They chose a morning when the valley was still and bright, the last of the spring frost lifting from the grass. There was no crowd, no finery beyond what Daisy could sew herself and what Nathan already owned. The ceremony took place just outside the church, The doors opened to let in the breeze and bird song. Daisy stood beside Nathan, her shoulders back, her gaze steady. She was not asking permission. She was claiming a future. Reverend Turner spoke of commitment not as rescue or sacrifice, but as companionship of two people who chose to stand together, not because they were whole, but because they were honest. When Nathan took Daisy's hands, his grip was warm and sure. "I won't promise you a life without hardship," he said quietly, "but I promise you will never face it alone." Daisy felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. "I promise to stay," she replied. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I choose to be." They were married without applause, without spectacle. Only the sound of the wind in the trees and the steady certainty of what they had built. As they rode back toward the hills, Daisy looked ahead instead of behind. Cedar Ridge no longer loomed as a place of judgment. It was simply a town they passed through, no longer the center of her world. The cabin waited on the ridge, solid and familiar. The firewood stacked neatly by the door, the life they had chosen, ready to receive them. And for the first time, Daisy Finch understood something her mother never had. Belonging was not something given by blood. It was something built patiently, bravely by those willing to choose it every day. The first winter Daisy Finch spent as a married woman arrived quietly. Snow returned to the hills above Cedar Ridge, settling over the trees and the cabin with a gentleness she had never known before. This time, when the cold pressed against the walls at night, it did not feel like a threat. The fire was lit before dusk. The door was barred against the wind, and beside her, Nathan Grant slept with the steady calm of a man who no longer lived, only to endure. Daisy moved through the days with a confidence that still surprised her. She worked as she always had, cooking, mending, tending the small tasks that made a life hold together, but now she did not do them to earn her right to exist. She did them because this was her home. Some nights, memories still came. Her mother's voice, her brother's small hand slipping from hers, Ed's shadow in the doorway. But the memories no longer ruled her. They were part of her past, not her definition. When they rose, Nathan listened without fixing, without doubting, and when words failed her, his presence was enough. On Christmas Eve, nearly a year after she had been left to freeze outside Cedar Ridge, Daisy cooked another meal. It was simpler this time, but her hands did not shake. She laid the table with care, set out bread and stew, and placed a small sprig of pine between them. Nathan watched her from the doorway. Something soft and reverent in his expression. "Merry Christmas," he said. Daisy smiled, a real one, unguarded and warm. "Merry Christmas." They ate slowly, savoring the quiet. Outside, snow fell thick and steady, sealing the world away. Inside, the fire burned low and sure. Later, as they sat together near the hearth, Daisy rested her head against Nathan's shoulder and felt the truth settle fully into place. She had not been saved. She had survived. She had chosen to speak, chosen to stay, chosen to love. The girl her mother had thrown away no longer existed, not because she had disappeared, but because she had grown into someone stronger, someone who knew her worth did not depend on being small or silent or forgiven. Daisy Finch Grant closed her eyes, listening to the wind move through the pines, and understood that she was no longer waiting for the world to make room for her. She had built her own place in it. And here, at last, she was home,